Thanks. I'm super glad to be back with y'all for the second part of this. I will say I'm flying a little blind for whatever Zoom reason. Zoom doesn't let me see anybody. So please, if you have questions and stuff, definitely unmute. I tend to talk fast and get a lot in there, so don't hesitate to cut me off. I'm really excited to finish out this conversation with you and to hopefully leave you with some information that makes you think, that encourages you to push yourself a bit, and also gives you hope that things can get better. So I wanted to step back to sensory issues for a few minutes. Spencer, I believe Spencer was the one who asked the question about assessments last time. So I actually spoke to my OT and talked to her about it. So, on the screen, you can see the sensory over response. And I just wanted to briefly review those, right? Sensitivity to clothing, discomfort or resistance to hygiene, gags easily to taste or smells, eats a limited variety of foods, avoids climbing, swinging, sliding, and distressed by sounds. Give me a second. Under signs of under response, right, are decreased awareness of pain or temperature, sloppy eater, overstuffing their mouth, chews or eats non-food items, craves movement, clumsy, falls a lot, decreased awareness of internal body signals. And so, thinking about these two things, when I asked my OT at work, what are the assessments that are done? It was not just a very clear cut answer. She said that they do a lot of observation. They do parent interviews and reports. They have assessments. Some are really short. Some take up to 4 hours. And so depending on what they feel is necessary, then they approach the thing as kind of from all angles and then make a determination. So when I said refer to OT, I back that up with refer to OT. They apparently have a lot that they put into it, and it's not just something as simple as an assessment. But for those of us who are not OT practitioners, I think just building into our assessments and asking these questions about over response and under response, keeping in mind, right, that over about the age of 4 or 5 is when you should really, if these problems continue, that's when it's kind of the warning sign, like, hey, something else might be going on. But I did a presentation with Amy Rosello last year. She's the director of OT for Primary Behavioral Health, and she had this video that showed what a school in Connecticut is doing to help support kids. And I just wanted to show it to you. It's about a sensory room. It focuses on kids with autism, but like just thinking about any kids with sensory issues, thinking about this, I just want you to kind of think about it as you watch it and see if it doesn't strike up any thoughts and ideas for you. So.
Research shows that if the student's in the right mindset and they get their sensory needs met, they're going to be much better learners.
Hands to your heart space. Take a deep breath in.
The sensory room is probably my most important piece of the day. Students go to the sensory room in order to calm their bodies and get all the emotions out and stabilize themselves so they're ready to learn and they're happy.
When we designed the sensory room, we actually took the entire room apart. We carpeted the floor so that we could absorb some of the sound. We put the shades on the ceiling to change the light. So when they walk in that room, they feel the change.
My class specifically, we utilize the room once a day for a 30-minute break.
First thing that they do is go on the ball and they bounce to a metronome. It's really a way to ground them into the space and give them some sensory input before we have them go out into the room.
We're going to do our rotation now, okay?
So there's different stations in the sensory room, and some of my students love specific stations. One in particular loves the punching bag and the ropes. He's able to get all that anger and frustration out, so that calms him down. Whereas another student, I know he needs calming movements, so he's on the swing going back and forth.
Another area in the room is the crash pad. You will see students that have sensory issues bump into walls, bang their head. So what we've created is a safe space to crash into. And then there's the light wall. You could use your hands, you could use your feet. There's different games that are programmed on there.
Yes, good girl.
We also work on balance and coordination. The walking path works on all of those, and they have to right themselves, correct their body in space. We have 10-pound slam balls. Some students just need to come in, pick something heavy up and throw it. That's the essence of a sensory room. You're putting materials in there that are appropriate, so a student's not throwing a chair. And at the end, when they finish with their stations, they lay on the floor and they're squished. So everything that we do in there is predictable. There's a set sequence.
We're all done with sensory room. We're going to walk back to our class.
So after the sensory room, they're able to focus more. They're quieter and their hands are to themselves and they're able to listen to my directions. We're here, we came from sensory room, we're ready to learn.
How does the sensory room make you feel?
Happy.
Okay, so now that we got that up and going and you guys could see that, I thought it was just really interesting, right? I don't know of a school in the area that has the real estate to give an entire classroom to it, but even like an office or something where they could do a small version of that, just think about like how much more effective we could be in helping kids with sensory issues. In talking with my OT at my job, she said that she worked in the school system actually, and she was pretty much relegated to helping kids learn how to hold their pencils correctly. And I had a great conversation and dialogue with her about it. I'm like, really? Like, if kids are on sensory overload, we care about how they're holding their pencils. We don't care about the fact that they're disrupting themselves, they're disrupting others, they're not learning anything, but hey, they can hold their pencil. And she's like, it was extremely frustrating for her to not be able to do more. And in watching this video, I just thought, how amazing, right? Would the 504 plans look if instead of pegging every kid with anxiety and saying, okay, well, you can use a stress ball and you can doodle and you can go to the office and listen to music for 15 minutes, if we were able to like find the nuance in that and say like, hey, maybe there's something more going on, and hey, this is maybe a sensory issue and they're overloaded right now, and have them be able to go to a safe space and just kind of work it out. I mean, watching that video, there are some things I want to do, right? I want to throw myself on that crash pad some days and just be like, I give up, right? Or I want to take that slam ball and chuck it against that trampoline and be like, this parent is driving me nuts. So it's not even just for people with sensory issues, it's just people who might be overloaded in general. And so I just wanted to show you that and kind of get us starting to think about, how do we really truly support these kids? And I think definitely advocating for OT to be in the schools and part of that interdisciplinary team. But I think we need to be explicit in like, we want them to be able to assess for these issues, not just teach a kid to hold a pencil. So moving on, the next part is about the importance of parenting. When I was first asked to do this presentation back for the Critical Issues Conference, they said, we want to understand why we've seen a rise in anger and aggression. And I could not find any research over the last 5 to 7 years that spoke to specific factors. And, as I told you earlier about research, right? Like, you design a study, you run it, you analyze the data, you put it together, you shop it around, and you're looking at 2 to 3 years before you really see that in print. But more than that, if you're saying, I think this is contributing to anger, then you're going to study just that, right? And you're going to say, I think this is contributing. You can't say what is contributing, because that's not going to be a great study design. But if we think about like all the possibilities anecdotally, right? Like in the last 20 years, we've seen many changes in like recommended social approaches for children, in the teaching approaches, in the expanse of technology, and the accessibility and mobility of it, right? We've seen a change to the juvenile justice system. We're seeing children who are being raised by those who were raised at a time of everybody gets a trophy, everybody gets to feel good, and where technology became a major presence in the homes and schools, right? Where media became much more accessible everywhere, and where instant gratification opportunities kind of expanded, right? So we're seeing anecdotally all these changes, but research-wise, they're not necessarily speaking to each of those. Thinking about it from my own life, growing up, if my mom was on the phone, talking to my friends was out, right? Like I just had to say like next time. We had to time our bathroom breaks and snack grabbing with the commercials of TV, right? So we'd be like, okay, go. And we knew we had like 2 minutes to get there and back. If we wanted to get on the internet, we had to listen to the dial-up. And I remember one day specifically, like I hit the dial-up and it was super slow that day. I made a sandwich, I came back, it was still dialing up. But even what was available was very limited compared to what is now, right? But now if I want like fettuccine Alfredo, mind you, like not a great version of it, I can take it out of the freezer and put it in the microwave, and 2 minutes later I have crappy Alfredo. And so we're raising kids in a world where patience is not really practiced, and impatience can increase anger. One of the most common triggers I hear from my patients is not getting what I want or being told no. That sets off their anger. And this is actually supported by the research of Dr. I can't really pronounce his name. I need to figure it out, but I think it's Olschewski from Yale's Medicine Children's Study Center. He says that this not getting what they want is a critical component to like increased anger. And he supports that. So when we talk about what is contributing to anger and aggression, it's really hard to say, you know. And when I was designing my dissertation, I'm like, oh, I'm going to study this variable and this variable and this variable and this variable. one of my committee members was like, whoa, slow down. I'm like, what? And she's like, we cannot learn everything from one study, but we can make the most of what we learn in that study. And so she had me like pull out all these variables and said, no, you get to study these 2 things. I'm like, but I had 7. She's like, yeah, no. And so anger is really not any different. Like, you're going to look at it through a specific lens and say, I think it's the parent-child relationship. I think it's the increase in technology. I think it's the increase in ADHD, whatever it might be. That's kind of what the studies show. But to really pinpoint and say, like, this is specifically contributing, it was hard to find in the research. One thing we do know for sure, right, is that every single study I looked at said that parenting, parental role modeling, and parental emotional competence makes the major difference in a child's emotional development and behavioral expression. So let's talk about that. When we're talking about parental interactions, we are talking about very specific things. We're saying when the parent and the child are interacting, children are paying attention to the emotional socialization practices of parents. So like how a parent, right, interacts in social contexts with others helps their children learn what is and is not appropriate in these contexts. Therefore, it's setting them up to learn ways to self-regulate through those interactions their parents are doing with others. And I mentioned this last time, right? We have kids who come on the unit and they're explosive, they're disrespectful, they're all over the place. And then you get on the phone with the parent and they're explosive and they're disrespectful and they're all over the place. You're like, oh, I see where they learned it. And so very much that paying attention to how their parents are interacting is teaching these kids how to interact. Parental affect, positive parental affect, that is high parental warmth and low parental rejection, right? So very low levels of parental like control, like micromanaging every little thing and really supporting them with warmth. That is a beneficial thing for children in those parent-child interactions. We know about healthy parenting styles. We know that authoritative parenting, you know, all the way back from Ainsworth's work, right, is very important to healthy development in multiple ways. This also includes emotional regulation and ability to like interact appropriately with others. And then parental emotional competence. How competent parents feel in their ability to understand and express their emotions, right, appropriately helps kids learn that themselves. And so research has shown that parents with low emotional competence tend to raise children with low emotional competence and vice versa. The interpersonal acceptance rejection theory, that says that parents who practice parental acceptance, which is warmth, affection, support, love, comfort, care, nurturance, right? Like nurturing their children in a difficult time. Parents who approach parenting from a place of acceptance and warmth, they tend to have greater outcomes for their kids than parents who come from a place of rejection, which is coldness, lack of affection, hostility and aggression, indifference, neglect, and undifferentiated rejection, which, if you don't know what that is, undifferentiated rejection is children's belief that their attachment figure does not really love them, even though there may not be any like obvious like behavioral indicators saying that they're, you know, that the attachment figure is aggressive or unaffectionate or neglecting. Just these children have a belief that their you know, parents don't love them. And so when they come from that belief, then they tend to really struggle with anger and aggression because they're not able to regulate well. So some of the benefits of parental acceptance: better psychological adjustment for the children, greater independence and ability to do things for themselves and step away from their parent-child relationship a bit. More positive self-esteem, more positive self-adequacy, like feeling that they can accomplish things and do things. So not necessarily efficacy, but like, I am worth something, I can do this type kind of combination. Emotional responsiveness, being able to, you know, interpret it and respond appropriately to others. Emotional stability for themselves, and then having just a greater, more positive outlook on the world. All of these come from parents who practice from a place of acceptance. So if you see, there's a lot of emotionality built into the parent-child relationship and how that affects them. And the opposite can be said: when it's lacking, it can cause a problem. So I just kind of want to show you a funny video to, some of the things we talked about can be tricky, and I thought this was a good representation of what not to do. If you've ever seen Everybody Loves Raymond, I have family and friends who say it's pretty close to what marriage and children are like. And so I thought this was a really funny way to kind of segue into the next topic of parental role modeling.
The angry family. The daddy was mad at the mommy.
Whoa, the myriad! Just so you know, Ray, we're getting the flower drapes. Just so you know, Ray, I ordered the boring couch without the footrest. And Ray, we're gonna move in across the street from your parents. Just so you know. Na 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 ba 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 ba. Faker!
What?
You could use the VCR, but you don't want to, so you pretend not to be able to. Faker! Look around. Everything in here is your decision. That lamp, that painting, the flower drapes over the sink. I hate those drapes. Look at them. They're one pattern. The walls are totally different pattern. Seriously, what were you thinking with those drapes? Turn around! Stop it! Shift it down!
The mommy was mad at the daddy.
Why did you make me do that?
Get out of here!
What did you do, Ray? What the hell did you do? I need to listen, Ben.
Yes, because...
What is wrong with you? You can't tell I'm upset? I mean, after how many years? You can't tell I'm not in the mood right now? It's to make his life easier. You told him to screw up their wedding. What is wrong with you? It's their wedding. Would you have done that with our wedding? Would you have purposely done something? Now get out!
I am not getting... What are you crazy? Are you crazy? Take it out! Take it out!
Just give it!
You gotta love Peter Boyle. I thought this was a good example, right? Like, even if we have a lot of moments where we're doing well, there are moments where we're human and we flip out and we lose it a lot. And our kids are paying attention to that, even if we think they're not, because they're on electronics and stuff. Prensky actually did a lot of research in the early 2000s to show that kids' brains are changing and that they need multiple things to keep their attention. And so if they're on electronics, they're actually paying better attention to things around them than we are. And so, we really need to help parents understand that their kids are paying attention, and that parental role modeling is one of the keys to helping reduce anger and aggression in kids. And so the research shows that parental role modeling, right, it can impact a child's trajectory for emotional competence, right? We talked about the emotional competence of parents. By them demonstrating a lack of emotional competence, kids are then learning how not to emotionally handle things, right? So they are developing this inability to cope emotionally in different contexts and settings. And if that's happening in childhood, it's following them. It's affecting the socio-emotional functioning of adolescents and beyond. And just imagine these poor adolescents, right? Their brains are already growing. They're starting to pay attention to the fact that they're different than other kids. They're seeing that comparison that just gets like severe in adolescence, right? The imaginary audience, the personal fables of Elkind. As we're looking, we're saying like, look, I'm different than these kids. I'm not handling things as well. And then the peers are, judging you and making comments. And so it becomes very obvious as kids transition that they are not handling things as well, and that it can cause problems for them with their peers and their ability to learn how to socially and emotionally function with their peers. And that can follow them through adolescence into adulthood. And so it's crazy to think that this emotional competence has a long-lasting trajectory for kids, positively or negatively. And it's also about like the direct and indirect interactions, right? We talk about social learning theory. I mentioned the Bobo doll last time, right? Kids watching their parents and how they interact, They are learning that. How kids are interacting with their parents in that moment and the parents are interacting with the kids. Kids are paying attention to that and to the details, and they're taking it in and saying, okay, this is okay, this is not okay, this is okay, whatever. And so it doesn't matter whether it's direct or indirect, just interactions alone are helping kids, figure things out positively or negatively. And we often parent the way we were parented, even though we swear up and down, we will not be our parent, right? I will never do this like my mom does or my dad does or whomever the caregiver was, right? We're like, I will never be that. And then all of a sudden something happens and you hear something like, where's mom? I heard mom. Oh my gosh, did that come out of me? And it's like a moment of like, what? But we often tend to parent the way we were parented. And so in thinking about those initial assessments with the parent and children, maybe that's a good thing to add in, like to ask the parents, tell me how you were parented. What were your parents like, or your caregivers, your guardians? What were they like growing up? How did they parent you? Because that may give you some insight into how these children are being parented themselves. But it's also, I don't know about you, but it's really uncomfortable to look at the way I am doing things and saying, did I just sound like my mom? Did I just sound like my dad? Oh crap. But it's also really important because if we want to change things, we have to first, be able to acknowledge that we need to change things. So encouraging the parents to share that, so we might be able to share with them like, hey, have you thought about this? Some of the interventions that are used to help parents learn that parental role modeling, right? The first one is parent-child interaction therapy, PCIT. And this one is really used with children between the ages of 2 and 7, so very young. And the goal of it is to help the parent and the child work together through a set of exercises and sessions with a therapist who coaches the parent from another room, like through an earbud. And the goal is to help the parent focus on learning their child's positive behavior, disregarding like the minor misbehaviors and providing that consistent feedback and consequence for negative and aggressive behaviors, all while remaining calm. So really is just training the parents to be able to handle things and help role model for their kids that emotional competence, those interactions, and keeping them appropriate. Parent management training is similar in its techniques, but the therapist only works with the parents, not the children. And so the parents learn it and then take it home. And the other one is the collaborative and proactive solutions. This one is actually a program that's based on the idea that like the explosive or disruptive behavior from children is not necessarily about attention seeking, but it's more about a lag in their skill building and ability to handle things. And so this one is really focused on teaching children how to build those skills that they lack to respond appropriately in a situation more effectively than like throwing a tantrum. So the first one is parent-child together, the second one is parent, and the third one is the child. So I have another video. This one has a few videos in it, to just kind of have a provider who has been practicing this kind of share her experiences and how effective it is. And so part of it is it's an educational video, so the guy is introducing it and talking a little bit more about it. But I really liked what the provider had to say about the outcomes for her.
We know that it actually really works. And PCIT is really helpful for improving child behavior, but also helping parents feel less stressed and overwhelmed, and also helping them feel more confident with their parenting skills and abilities. The overarching goal of PCIT is to improve the relationship between young children and their caregivers. And the way that we accomplish this is through coaching sessions in which parents use positive and consistent strategies that help their children feel more secure and better about themselves and their families. The strategies learned in PCIT help improve child behavior and really leads to some positive behaviors, kind of the behaviors parents want to see more of, such as listening and minding and turn-taking and sharing, while at the same time reducing some of the behaviors that they don't really want to see, so kind of hitting a sibling, taking things without permission, whining or sassing.
I think that a huge strength of it is that it really focuses on the parent and child relationship, and it really helps parents manage their kids' behavior with positivity instead of just harsh discipline, so that the relationship can really experience an increase in warmth and enjoyment. I've had several cases where when we first started, the children, they were dysregulated, the parents were overwhelmed, they were slightly disengaged. Through PCIT, the parents were starting to enjoy their children a little bit more, and then the child, as a result, became a lot more regulated, and it was just really nice to see that relationship blossom. I did have a girl once who, when we started, she was just I mean, pretty out of control. But by the end of it, her mom had mastered the positive skills that we focus on in the beginning, but then also had been able to use other discipline techniques to really manage her behavior. So by the time they graduated, it was a totally different interaction between the two.
But I really like to stress that when a family gets to the end of PCIT, so they've successfully mastered all of the skills, it means that they have accomplished it through all of their hard work. And really, we just like PCIT because it's incredibly effective in helping families make positive changes and also really just transform their lives for the better.
I really liked what the provider said. She pointed out that a lot of parents come in and they're somewhat disengaged, right? I don't know how many of you have experienced that, but I've experienced a lot where the parents come in and they just seem totally done, right? They've been doing this a long time. They've been fighting this fight, but they've been literally, fighting it instead of trying to kind of roll with the resistance and learn those parenting skills that can help them, but they just kind of seem disengaged is a really good way to describe it. And I love how she says that this allows that parent to enjoy their child again, to enjoy spending time with them and to develop that relationship that's going to be critical for that child's trajectory. I also like how politically correct she was when she was like, she was, out of control. And I'm like, I have other words in my mind when I talk about kids who are out of control. So I appreciated her politeness about it. But I thought it was a great story to say, like, this was the building block we started with, and then we were able to add these other disciplinary techniques and consistency for the mom. So she felt even more confident, right? So when that confidence is there, then they can approach each situation and know that they've been able to do it. PCIT is a certification, right? It's not just something we can pick up and do. And I don't typically work with younger kids, so I know that it's hard to find that. I also know that those three, the parent management training and the parent PCIT, they're not typically covered by insurances. And it's really frustrating because the research is very clear when talking about children and anger that including the parents in that therapy, doing the family therapy, the PCIT, the PMT, those types of things, it's really important. You're going to have greater outcomes for this family and these kids if you include the parents. And yet insurance will often say nope, individual, even down to very young children. So we try to find ways around it, but it's frustrating because these are really proven effective treatments, and yet insurance is like no. And so I kind of want to say, like, do you want the biggest bang for your buck? Then include the parents in the therapy. So what does this mean for us as practitioners? What does this mean? Where do we go from here, right? What do we do with this information? And so I wanted to first talk about the assessments and questionnaires. I kind of put together a list of the ones that were in the different studies that I used. The first two are actually not assessments and questionnaires. The first two are trainings that are implemented in schools. And so I don't know how many school personnel we have on here but I know that we all work with children who spend 9 months of their year and half of their days in school. And so I think this would be really good information to try to impart into the schools and see what they can do. So the first one is cognitive behavioral anger management training. So really using that CBT perspective, but focused on anger management. And this is a study done by Feindl and Engel back in 2011. So they talk about the difficulties anger can cause in the school settings. They actually describe the issue by saying intense and unmodulated anger can fuel cognitive distortions and result in impulsive and aggressive responses toward perceived provocations. These responses are often reinforced by short-term reductions in anger, immediate impact in the stimulus situation, and social consequences from peers, right? So these kids who explode, right? They have that anger explosion, that energy gets released. They have a short-term, like, kind of reprieve in their anger. The stimulus, right? There's an immediate impact to, like, whatever stimulated them in the situation, but then there's the social consequences from their peers, like typically not good, right? The kids just exploded, their peers like, whoa, not cool. And so they're saying, like, this can cause a lot of problems for kids. And so this program actually is like an intensive program to help them. It has several sessions and stuff. It has individual sessions, it has group sessions but it is implemented into the schools. They focus on three components. They focus on the physiological reaction to anger, the cognitive distortions that can come from anger, and the behavioral outputs of anger, right? So they tackle all three aspects and say, okay, we're going to focus on this. And they really help kids learn to manage better. The second one is aggression replacement training, also from their study. This one uses different aspects and different objectives to achieve their outcomes. So they're saying, hey, when this kid is aggressive, let's see if we can replace it with something else. And so they actually have like social skills trainings for kids. And they, over the time, the length of the program, these kids learn 50 social skills to help them better improve and react in a situation. They also learn ways to better manage their anger, right? They also spend time talking about moral reasoning. So they have these different objectives, and within that objectives are sessions and outcomes that they want to accomplish. And so they have found actually great success in a reduction in aggression in schools when kids are learning this. They feel like they have more tools available to help them. As for the assessments, Feindl and Engel spent a decent amount of time in their article talking about like, here are all these different assessments that are pretty easy to use. Most are self-report. I didn't spend a lot of time like digging into these assessments to say like, is there parent versions or teacher versions? I know that when I was working on my dissertation and I had it way too big and grand with 8,000 variables and they cut me down to 2, that I had gone through and I pulled in like, okay, this variable, here's an assessment and here's the parent version and here's an assessment, and here's the parent version. And then I did the work to find out the validity and the reliability, right, of each of these and see what the testing says. I didn't do that on each of these, but I wouldn't be surprised if we're doing an assessment on a child if there's not a parent or teacher version to support that. So it's not just, the 5-year-old telling you about their anger. But each one is varies in length, right? So the aggression questionnaire has 29 items, the children's inventory of anger 30, how I think questionnaire, normative beliefs about aggression scale, multi-dimensional school anger inventory. And then one study by Fight and colleagues focused on the anger dysregulation subscale of the children's emotional management scale. And so it only had 3 items, but it was focused on anger dysregulation. And so these are all really easy to administer. They're easy to score, to give you an idea of like, where is this kid, on their level of anger and aggression? Are we dealing with normative anger and aggression? Or are we dealing with something else? Kind of like we talked about before, right? There are all these contributors to it, but if we've looked past that and it's still going, if it's those 4 things of like out of the blue, the triggers, it's more intensive than the trigger warrants. The person has apologized, and the 4th one I'm blanking on, but what was the 4th one? It's back in the notes, right? But if those 4 things continue and that makes it more than normative, right? Then we've got to start looking at it. And so these are different scales that can help you assess for that. Fight and colleagues actually, they're the ones who've talked about overt and reactive aggression. So they use the peer conflict scale, and that can tell them whether this is overt, like outwardly, or, reactive, like perceived and stuff. And then the perceived containment questionnaire. If you recall, perceived containment, right, is a child's belief in whether an adult can control their behavior, like an adult can control the child's behaviors or not, right? So it's like, I believe you can handle me, I don't believe you can handle me. And so kids with high levels of perceived containment believe that adults are in charge and can control what the child is doing. Kids with low levels tend to believe the opposite. And so there is actually a perceived containment questionnaire. It's only 9 items, and can tell you where a kid lands on that belief system. So these are all ways that you can tap into it, just to better understand. But additionally, what we can do, right, is we can find who provides parent-child therapy, right? We can become certified ourselves if we're working with children that young, and provide that service to the parents. In looking at it quickly, there are a few places in Utah that do it. There's a facility in Salt Lake. Because insurance won't really cover it, they are a sliding scale fee facility. Utah Behavioral Services says that they provide it, right? Utah State says that they offer it through their child center there. And so there are different places, especially if you're tapping like into the universities where the students are learning how to do it. Oftentimes you can get it free or for a greatly discounted price, right? So looking into those resources for parents. Providing in-home therapy. We know from the research, right, that when we do things in the environment when we learn something in the environment where we need to use it, we are more likely to use it, right? That the whole like foundation of ABA therapy is like learning in the home, using it in the home. And so if we can help find or provide in-home therapy to where parents and children can work on things in the home where they just learned it, there may be greater outcomes for them. We also can refer parents to alternative sources of support. It doesn't just have to be therapy, right? Sometimes there are other ways that we can help them, and they may be more cost effective. And so the next slide will actually talk about a lot of like the outside of the box resources that I found, websites and parent trainings and stuff that don't necessarily have to be at the cost of weekly therapy. We can also advocate for insurances to cover family therapy and PCIT if they don't. I think, again, approaching it from that dollar sign of like, hey, you're going to get a bigger bang for your buck if you are willing to include the parent in this and pay for it. Like, they're going to have the greatest effect on their child, and so they need to be the ones in the therapy with us learning this. And so advocating for that family component is going to be really important. I think we could spend more time in our initial assessments, understanding their infancy, understanding what that looked like. Were there sensory issues? Are there any physical things that we need to be made aware of that they've been dealing with, that they dealt with before, right? How were parents parented themselves, and is that playing a role in how they're parenting their child? And then we can assess and say, okay, we feel like there's something more going on, and we can refer out for like an OT assessment, or we can say, I'd really like to have a more well-rounded picture of what's going on. Let's do some neuropsych testing. I love it when my patients come to me and they have neuropsych testing done. I'm like, oh yes, a blueprint, awesome. And I get to look through it and say like, that's a good idea. That's a good idea, right? Because the work has been done to say like, there's something more going on than what we're seeing in those initial surface assessments. And so just really building those out to include more questions, maybe even some of the questionnaires and that to assess for it, instead of just my kid's angry. Okay, what does that look like? I think if we, yes.
Sorry to interrupt, but
No,
this
please.
is a great segue that we're on this topic. There was a question that was asked in the chat. Jen is asking, do you ever perform the adult autism screening tool on parents? And do you see autism expressed in the parents as a function of the child?
I only work with children, so no, I don't do that. But I've actually been having a lot of conversations lately with people about this, and talking about that nature versus nurture, like how much of the autism is coming through the genetics and how much of it is learned because a parent. I do think we're seeing an increased prevalence, right, in adults being diagnosed with autism. And so I think if we are interacting with the parents and we have kind of a feeling like, hey, there might be something going on with this parent, I don't think it's a terrible idea to feel that out and see if they're open to doing that assessment and then referring them out to get it done. Because yeah, there may be an indication there, right? That, hey, if the parent is functioning this way, is it a learned behavior from the child, or is there something more going on? So funny you should ask that, because I've seriously been having conversations for the last 2 weeks about that, but I myself don't do it because I don't work with adults. I work with the children and deal with their interact with their parents as well. But I do think it's something to be mindful of when you're assessing the kids, just and the interaction with the parent. You're like, hey, being in tune, is there something more going on? There's these different books coming out speaking about women and autism specifically and how it presents differently. And so taking the time to educate ourselves a little bit better so we feel confident to say like, hey, maybe there's something going on, refer out for ADOS testing, right? Refer out for adult ADOS testing if you feel like it. I think that's a great thing. I myself haven't done it, but it's something I'm becoming more and more aware of recently. Did that answer the question?
I think that did. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So advocating for OT to be included in the interdisciplinary team at schools. If you recall from that video I shared twice, because you couldn't see it the first time, the person who was in charge was actually a physical therapist. So I'm like, hey, the more specialties we can get involved to really look at this kid holistically and make a plan, the better. But being very explicit and advocating, saying like, we want them to be able to do, if we have concerns for sensory issues, do sensory assessments and stuff, not just be focused on helping kids occupationally learn how to hold their pencil. I mean, Taylor Swift holds it between her two fingers and she has done just fine. Like her pen's like this, right? This is how the girl writes. She's done just fine. So I think I'm more worried about the sensory issues that are going undiagnosed and untreated. So really being loud, and also continuing to advocate for more school social workers, more speech therapists, right? I know we don't have unlimited funds, but I think I think we'd be surprised if we could put the funds there where we would have to spend less maybe on aids and things like that, because we're not having to manage as much behavior because we've correctly assessed for it and made a plan for it. So mindfulness training, actually, Boxmeyer and colleagues spent a lot of time in their article talking about mindfulness training. They talked about how there's a thing called mindful coping power, and it's a design program that you bring into the schools and you teach the kids about it. And they have actually seen great outcomes. They've seen an improvement in behavioral dysregulation, improvement in emotional dysregulation. They actually have brain image studies that indicate that the areas of the brain that link to emotional dysregulation have density improvements, meaning they're doing better, right? Because of these this intervention. And they said that regarding cognitive and attention dysregulation, it's decreased anger rumination, it's increased cognitive flexibility with kids and their attention spans. And so finding a way to encourage this in school, you know, I was thinking about, hey, do we have the opportunity to maybe go volunteer at some of these schools and spend a morning a week doing it? Or do we go in and do a teacher, you know, in service, right? And help them learn these things. Like, how do we support the schools? Because again, kids are spending at least half their days, the majority of their year in schools. How can we help them do better and help the teachers and the administration feel more supported? And so bringing this information from these journal articles into the schools and actually putting them in the hands of those who need it. Anger management training, the aggressive replacement training, again, those two things I talked about that have shown great outcomes, that again, putting that into the school and helping the teachers feel like they have more tools available to them. Lastly, collaborating with researchers on studies about what are the current factors contributing to anger and aggression. I had the benefit of continuing to be a practitioner while living in the world of academia. I don't recommend it. It was really exhausting. But I worked full-time and went to school full-time. And so as I'm living in the academia world, I am seeing the holes that they don't see because they're not practicing, right? They're just looking at it from a researcher perspective. And I saw how detached academics are sometimes when designing studies and making recommendations for use. And so as I would discuss this with people, I would say, like, I would ask questions and say, well, what about this? What about this? And I would be asking from a practitioner perspective. And a common response I got was, oh, I hadn't thought of that. I'm like, right? But additionally, often the recommendations that are determined through the studies don't make it into the hands that need it. You know, there's a joke in academia that we write papers for each other. And it's like, you pretty much do, because I'm not getting this research. I don't know these things because you're posting it, you're, you know, producing it and publishing it in the Journal of Adolescent Development and the Journal of Family Studies. I'm like, that's all great, right? But the parents who need it, they read like Parenting and Family Fun and other parenting magazines. And so finding ways to disseminate the information to those who really need it is going to be important. So I think if we can collaborate and say, like, let me bring my practitioner perspective to your study design and make sure that we're making the most of the study, right? We can't study everything, but we can make the most of what we learn in one study. And bringing a practitioner perspective can help do that. And so teaming up, especially because we have an R1, you know, university right there in Salt Lake City, and we have other universities around the state that are doing a lot of really good research and saying, how can I support you? And how can we make sure that we are supporting those who need this information? So thinking about like the outside the box resources, right? There are several online resources for parents. There's the he'sextraordinary.com has several things. They have this emotion wheel that's really fine-tuned for like little kids, right? There's the green zone and the red zone and the yellow zone and the blue zone, and then it talks about the different emotions, and it's like a very simplified version of the emotion wheel. But they have tons of resources. Some are free, some aren't. You sign up and you can pay per item, but they have a lot of good tools for parents to pull down and use with their kids. Childmind.org has a lot of information for parents. It has videos and articles and things they can look at. I'm going to try and show you Kids in the House, but it's very possible this isn't going to go well because I don't know what's happening with my computer. Dang it, didn't go well. I knew it. So it worked on my computer before I linked up, but Kids in the House has over 9,000 parenting videos on there from experts all over the country. Daniel Siegel, if you're familiar with him, he studies the brain right, in the child, and he does a lot of anger. He's the one who has like the hand model where it's like, this is the brainstem coming up, and this is the limbic system, and this is the cortex, and this is the frontal lobe. And, you know, when we get upset, we flip our lid, and so this becomes in charge. I actually use his hand model a lot to help the kids on the unit understand anger and figure out ways to manage it. And he talks about how even young kids, when you give them this visual of the brain, right, it very much looks like a brain. When you give them the visual of this brain and help them understand the concept of flipping their lid, then it gives them a tool and it gives them words to help them understand what's going on. It's really funny when I'm running the group on anger management and I ask for examples from the participants and the patients. I say, so tell me, what's a time where you kind of lost it and stuff. Some kids will actually hold up their hand and they're like, well, one time I did this and I totally flipped my lid, and they'll lift their hand. And I'm like, even just in a few minutes, I've given a kid a tool that they can use, right? So he's on there and with several videos about it. It does cost money. Like you can watch, I think it's like 5 free ones a month or something, and then you have to pay, but it's like $7 a month to have access to 9,000 videos on parenting. And it covers the gamut of all kinds of issues. And you just type anger in the top and you have over 55 videos. You have over 150, 200 articles. So I think it's a really good resource for parents. And then parentguidance.org is very similar. They have a lot of articles, they have a lot of information in that. So these are some online resources just parents can go to on a regular basis. But then there's also parenting programs around the country and the state, right? And thanks to COVID, one of the benefits is a lot has gone online. And so people can now more easily access these parenting programs. And some of these are much more financially doable than, you know, weekly therapy in that. So like the Love and Logic series, right? USU offers a Love and Logic series. Stronger Family Projects, UVU, they have their own programs. Strengthening Families 7 to 17, there's actually a couple of programs. There's the nationwide Strengthening Families, but last year at Critical Issues, there was a specific group from, I want to say Iowa, and they have their own Strengthening Families program, and they do biannually, every 2-year research to keep up their information to make sure they're staying on top of it. And they are staying focused on the changes and how to help support families. And they have, you know, you don't have to live in Iowa to access. It's an online program as well. And they have like kits and things you can buy. Fully Nested is another one. This is someone who was a Love and Logic instructor for a long time and felt like there were a few things that were missing. Loves the program, but felt like there was some missing. So she's got a master's in education and kind of developed her own parenting thing. It's like $250. You have unlimited access to videos for lifetime, access to her. She does, you know, face-to-face for those who need it and stuff. She's right here in Utah as well, you know, and it's, again, not terribly out of, what's the word I want? It's not terribly costly for people. The Family Support Center, Parent Education, there's classes and groups that they offer for people. You can just go there and see what their lists are. 123 Magic has a lot. Conscious Discipline has a ton of videos. Some of them are actually, they do it in a funny way to try to, you know, bring information to people, kind of like the Christina Kuzmek video last time. They do a lot of that, but it's another resource where parents can go and just learn different ways to help their kids. And then the STEP program, the Systematic Training for Effective Parenting. This is also one where they have kits and things like that parents can use. And all of these are, you know, not terribly outrageous in cost, and they're accessible all the time. So if parents are feeling overwhelmed and family therapy is not an option and PCIT is not an option, and we're doing what we can, like I know I bring parents into my session for, you know, 15, 20 minutes and talk with them, but then I have to make it about the kid so that I can, you know, bill accordingly. And it's like, it just feels so rushed sometimes. And I want so desperately to give them extra help. And so here's just a list of different resources to say, like, here, this might help you, give you some help, support along the way, and then, you know, allowing them to come in and discuss it with you. So I think the best we can do is advocate heartily for family therapy to be covered, to make sure that our focus is interdisciplinary, to make sure we're referring out if we need to, and to be tapping into every resource we can give to the parents. Any questions? I literally can't see anything, so I apologize.
I think the one question that was asked in the chat, Lynette Bingham was asking, what is his name again? I think she was referring to Daniel. Is it Siegel? Is that how you pronounce it?
Siegel. And he's written several books, right? He's written The Whole Brain Child, No Drama Discipline. I have like 4 or 5 of his books on my shelf, and now that I'm done with school, I don't have any excuse not to read them. But yes, he's put out a lot of information. He has his own YouTube page too.
Great. So someone else is asking how we collect CE credit. So if you want CE credit for this class, please fill out this evaluation that I'm dropping a link to in the chat. Fill that out and use the code that I'm also providing. That will allow me to issue a CE credit for this course here. And I'm also going to be sending all of these slides. So if you just saw, for example, that wonderful slide with all of the resources and you're like, oh, I didn't get to write all this down. Don't worry, I'm going to send those out to anyone who fills out the evaluation. That tells me that you either want their certificate or you just want the slides, but please fill out the evaluation because then I know who to send that to. All right.
I also on the end of the slideshow have included all the references I used. So if you wanted to go and read all the articles yourself, they are all right there for you. I enjoyed them a lot. I learned a lot from them.